What would happen if you and your husband and your family, they help build a Chabad center, a synagogue in Irvine, California, and all of a sudden, your husband says, I believe in Jesus. You know what would happen? What are the neighbors going to think? Sharon Allen, tell me a bit about your upbringing in New York City, what type of home you were raised in, what your family was like.
I was raised in an Orthodox Jewish home, an observant Jewish home. We kept the commandments, biblical commandments, as well as rabbinical commandments. And although these were rules and regulations that we followed, for us, it was our way of showing our love and devotion to God. And from the moment that my mom lit the Shabbos candles, before sundown on Friday evening until Saturday evening after sundown, there were certain things we could do, certain things we couldn't do. Of course, we kept a kosher home.
You married a nice Jewish guy?
My first marriage was to a Jewish man from a similar background.
And you had a daughter.
We have a daughter. And
it didn't work out too good.
No.
You got a, what did you get?
We got a divorce, but we got a Jewish divorce, which is called a get. And this get then enables the couple to remarry other people once again in the Orthodox Jewish wedding ceremony.
I think the Catholics stole it from us. They do the same type of thing. Anyway, what about you move to California, you start a whole new life, you get into real estate, you have your daughter there, and you fall in love with your boss.
That's right. My husband, Ron, owned the company, the real estate company that my real estate license was with, and we became friends. And then the more that we got to know each other, the more he realized, of course, I'm Jewish, because everybody who meets me knows right away I'm Jewish. And the only thing that he ever told me about his background was that he was a Protestant. But he never talked about church or Christianity, or he never mentioned Jesus. If he did, I would have run in the other direction. And every time my mom would be with Ron, she would say, he's so hamisha, which means he's so comfortable to be with. Or she would say, he's such a mensch, which means he's a good man. So both my parents became very close to Ron. In fact, after we married, Ron adopted Elisa, and in the adoption papers, it stipulated that he would raise Elisa Jewish. And we were living a Jewish lifestyle.
So she went to the Hebrew Academy,
yes.
You're in a Lubavitch synagogue. You couldn't get much more Jewish than you were. And you tell your husband maybe it's time for him to convert. He's in agreement, but what happened?
Well, we wanted to have what is called a kosher conversion, an Orthodox conversion. And so there are basically three ceremonies that are connected with having this kosher conversion. And the reason we chose an Orthodox conversion is because that's accepted everywhere in the world, and especially it's accepted in Israel.
I was going to say, for sure.
So I explained to Ron on this particular morning in a very matter-of-fact way that there would be three ceremonies. And the first ceremony would be water immersion into a mikvah. And this is for identification with the Jewish people and purification. And Ron
you know, all of Christianity, real Christianity, is Jewish. What is called baptism came from mikvah, immersion.
Exactly, yes. And the second ceremony is for a man who wants to be converted to Orthodox Judaism. He must have a circumcision. Now, in the case of my husband, who was already circumcised as a baby, well, for all men and as like my husband, who was already circumcised as a baby, what the rabbis do is they draw a bit of blood.
Okay.
And my husband was fine with that. It's symbolic, and he was fine with that. And then in an Orthodox conversion, it is necessary for the person who wants to be converted to appear before a bet din, a council of rabbis, a rabbinical court. And this person must appear before the rabbinical court and renounce whatever they believed in before. So since the only thing I had heard from my husband about his religion was that he was a Protestant, you know, so I figured, okay. So I explained to him in a very matter-of-fact way, I guess you'll go before the bet din and you'll renounce that man. Because Orthodox Jewish people, we don't say the name of Jesus, we say that man. And so I said, well, I guess you'll go before the rabbinical court and you'll renounce that man. And Ron looked at me and he said, I don't think I can do that. And I said, what? What do you mean you can't? I was in
Your
shock.
whole life is going to be messed up.
I mean, our home is used for Jewish outreach. In other words, when the unaffiliated in the community, they didn't have a synagogue that they belonged to, we would have outreaches, and they would come to our home.
Evangelists, I know. Go ahead.
And our daughter was at Hebrew Academy, and every time Rachel, the Rebbitzin, needed a drive to, ride to the sisterhood meetings, I drove her, and every time Ron saw the rabbi, they hugged. I mean, we had a kosher home. We were living a Jewish life.
So what do you do about this crisis?
Oh, I was in shock. I couldn't believe it. And then I said to Ron, you're such a successful businessman. How can you believe in something so pagan, so mythological? And at this point, I guess business was my husband's religion, actually. And but he just said, well, I don't know. It was just something that was natural to him, and he just couldn't do this. And so I was it was a horror for me that morning. But then, in a moment, I had a calming thought. I'll just read my Jewish Bible. And I figured it wouldn't take me long. I'd start at the beginning, and I'd start to read, and pretty soon I'd find a scripture that would prove to my husband that that man could never have been the fulfillment of the Jewish Bible.
So let's find out what happened when she starts reading for the first time in her life her own Bible, not just selected readings as they have in the synagogue, but cover to cover, because she was thinking for herself. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
We'll be right back to It's Supernatural.
Hello, YouTube. Mishpacha. Mishpacha is a Hebrew word. It means family. This is Sid Roth. Welcome to my world, where it's naturally supernatural. If you've been blessed by this show, please subscribe. Then click the bell so you won't miss a single episode of It's Supernatural.
We now return to It's Supernatural.
How could this happen? Sharon Allen was horrified. Her husband is ready to convert to Orthodox Judaism, and she finds out for the first time he's not willing to renounce Jesus as the Messiah. And all of a sudden, a thought comes into her head. I know where that thought came from. She's not too sure about it, but she says, look, it's just mythology. It'll take a few hours. I'll read my Tanakh, my Jewish scriptures. I'll blow the dust off. Even though she came from an Orthodox Jewish home, she, like myself, I came from an Orthodox Jewish background. We didn't read the scriptures. We just had like selected readings in the synagogue. She says, I'll just read a little and we'll blow this mythological, you couldn't believe, your husband was such a mensch. How could he believe in this Jesus? So you blow the dust off your Tanakh, your scriptures, you start reading it. How long did it take you, 5 minutes?
Well, there was one thing that I knew, and that is that everything that God wanted us Jews to know about his Jewish Messiah, so that we Jews would be able to recognize him when he would come, would be in my Jewish Bible.
Of course.
I figured it wouldn't take me long. I'd start to read. I started at page 1, and I prayed this prayer. I opened up my Bible, and I said, please, dear God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, please show me the truth about your Messiah so that I can make my husband Jewish. And I began to read, and my husband went off to work, and my daughter went off to school, and I sat there reading page after page, and hours later, my daughter came home from school, and my husband came home from work, and there I was still sitting page after page reading. And then the next morning, my husband went off to work, my daughter went off to school, and this went on. It went on for days, went on for weeks, went on for months. I couldn't believe what I was reading in my own Jewish scriptures.
No one had told you this before. Give me one example of something you read.
Well, in Isaiah 49, we actually hear the suffering servant Messiah lamenting to God that he failed to bring back the 12 tribes of Israel, to reconcile the 12 tribes of Israel. And then we hear God comforting the suffering servant Messiah. He says, it's too small a thing, too light a thing for me to send you to the 12 tribes of Israel only. I will give you to all the nations of the world. And the word nations in Hebrew is goyim. And I'm thinking, Gentiles? When did the Messiah come? Failed to bring back the 12 tribes of Israel, and then God gave it to all the Gentiles, all the goyim.
Yeah,
when did this happen?
But Sharon, you have to understand. you're not a rabbi. Why don't you, only rabbis can understand this book, at least so they say.
Yes.
Of course, that was until it was in modern English and 1,000 different varieties and computers, so that's not true anymore. However, did you go to your rabbi? Did you talk to someone that really knew?
Well, the rabbis say that you cannot read the Hebrew scriptures without the commentaries. So I bought the Sansino commentaries, I bought the Tanakh series by Masorah Publications, I bought the Rashi commentaries, and I kept reading, and I kept researching and researching. I bought the Targumim, and I kept researching and researching. I bought the Talmud, and I kept reading and reading and reading. And it seemed that the early rabbis, the ancient rabbis, they recognized that there were two pictures of the Messiah in the Hebrew scriptures. They even had names for them: Mashiach ben Yosef, Messiah son of Joseph, who would come as the suffering servant, and Mashiach ben David, Messiah son of David, who would come as the conquering hero king. And
in other words, I'm thinking about Joseph. His own brothers didn't recognize his authority, but the Gentiles, the Goyim, did. That's back to that scripture you read there.
well, I kept researching and the more I researched, the more it brought me back to what the people, the Gentile people in America, say about that man. And I thought, how can this be? So I did call my rabbi, and I asked my rabbi and his wife to come to my home, and I showed them my books, I showed them my library, because by this time I had a library, and explained to them what happened to me. And they said not to worry. And a few days later, they sent me Rabbi Ben-Zion Kravitz, who's a deprogrammer. And the first time that we met, he was in my home for 10 hours. We studied together. We looked at the Bible scriptures. We looked at Jewish history. And by the end of the 10 hours, we had decided, okay, the next time we would meet and we would discuss Maimonides' book, Guide to the Perplexed. Maimonides had written this book for his students because they were having difficulty understanding all the anthropomorphic appearances of God in the Hebrew scriptures. So we did. We met again and we discussed Maimonides' book. And then at that time, the rabbi mentioned a brand new anti-missionary book called The Jewish Response to the Christian Missionary, written by Gerald Siegel. So I took the book home. I read it, and then I called Rabbi Kravitz. I said, okay, now I'm ready to discuss the book. And Rabbi Kravitz said, well, you know, maybe it would be best if you could speak directly to Gerald Siegel. Now, at that time, Gerald Siegel lived in Brooklyn, New York. He's a school teacher. And so they devised a plan that every Monday evening, Gerald Siegel would call me collect.
Listen, Sharon, you're talking to the top foremost experts, rabbis in the world that are dedicated to proving Jesus is not the Messiah. Did you still believe that he could be at that point?
No, I could not believe in that man at this point because
But you're
it would
finding
have
all this
made me-
evidence.
I know. I kept
So
thinking
why-
I must be missing something. I kept thinking maybe I'm missing something. And so the next thing that happened is my rabbi from the synagogue called and said, you know, there's an internationally known deprogrammer who's coming to speak at your daughter's school, Hebrew Academy. His name is Rabbi Emmanuel Shachet.
Of course.
And so I thought, well, maybe he could help me. And so
I'll tell you what, hold that thought. When her whole family goes to this world-renowned rabbi on a lecture that Jesus is not the Messiah, you do not want to miss what's about ready to happen. Don't go away.
We'll be right back to It's Supernatural. We now return to It's Supernatural.
Hello, Sid Roth here with Sharon Allen. What happens when Sharon decides to prove to her husband, who's about ready to convert to Orthodox Judaism? Sharon's an Orthodox Jew. Her whole family, her daughter goes to the Hebrew Academy. They help build this Orthodox synagogue. And so they go to the Hebrew Academy, has this meeting with this world-renowned rabbi that's an expert in why Jesus is not the Messiah, and they decide that they're not going to question him before, but not interrupt him in any way, listen to what he has to say, and then get their questions answered afterwards. So you're sitting there, you're hearing the lecture.
Yes.
What's happening?
Well, as we had decided that we would go and we would sit up front because this is Elisa's school. We knew everybody. We felt comfortable. Elisa was on one side and Ron on the other. We sat up front and we listened to the rabbi speak. And of course, we had decided that, at the end of the evening and only at the end, I would quietly go up to the rabbi and ask him if he could help me. So the evening started, and of course, there were a lot of unaffiliated Jewish people in the audience, because this was also used as an outreach, so that the people in the community would send their children to Jewish day school, like we were doing. And so we sat there, and the rabbi talked about Israel, he talked about Jewish things, talked about Jewish community, and then he said, all right, are there any questions in the audience? And now the first person raises their hand and says, well, we're having difficulty with the missionaries in the area. And the rabbi says, you don't need to worry about the missionaries in the area. You just have to have a Jewish home. If you have a Jewish home, you don't have to worry. So now the second person raises their hand and says, well, Rabbi, you don't understand. The missionaries are meeting with our children and having Bible studies. And the rabbi said, look, if you send your children to Jewish day school like Hebrew Academy and you have a Jewish home, you're not going to have to worry. Now the third person raises their hand and says, Rabbi, you don't understand. The missionaries are giving our children Bible scriptures that they're bringing home that we've never heard before and we're not familiar with. And at that point, the rabbi was standing on a platform. And he had a podium in front of him. And he held the sides of the podium and he sort of like brought his body up over into the audience. And he shouted out into the audience, never, ever, under any circumstances, does any knowledgeable Jew ever turn to that man. I thought he was talking to me. And so I grabbed Ron's hand. I said, Ron, do you think I should say something? And Ron said, yes. And I grabbed Elisa's hand. I said, Elisa, do you think I should say something? She said, yes, Mommy. And so I had my Bible with me, and I said, Rabbi, what do you tell someone like me? I am a Jewish woman. I have a Jewish home. I know Yiddishkeit, Jewish life. And yet when I read my Hebrew scriptures, I see that man. Well, from that moment until the end of the evening, which was about 12 midnight, he and I were in direct dialogue. Now, during the course of the evening, both my husband and I would say to the rabbi, well, maybe someone else needs to speak. Someone else has a question, somebody wants to say something, but the audience people themselves said, no, we want to hear what you have to say. So we discussed Israel, we discussed Jewish commentaries, Jewish traditions. We talk about the Kippurah ceremony, where before Yom Kippur, the Orthodox Jewish man will take a rooster and 3 times twirl it on top of his head and say,
my grandfather in Poland used to do that.
That his sins would go into the rooster. But here's the interesting thing. For a woman, she would do a hen. But for a pregnant woman who doesn't know if her offspring will be male or female, she does, in addition to the hen, another hen and rooster, because she doesn't know if the baby she's carrying is male or female. And this came up because we were discussing sin, because the rabbi was saying, well, we don't believe, in sin. And so I brought up that ceremony showing how when the people say, may my sins go into the, they're showing that, yes, we do believe that we need atonement for sins. And so there we were discussing, and now the rabbi was anxious to bring the evening to a close. So he said in a loud voice, he said, and that man committed blasphemy from the cross. And I was shocked. I said, Rabbi, what are you talking about? He said, oh, yes. He said, that man committed blasphemy from the cross when he shouted, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And I said, Rabbi, maybe he said it in a crying voice. Maybe he said it in a pleading voice, in a lamenting voice. And the rabbi said, no. He committed blasphemy when he shouted, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And what the rabbi had forgotten in his anxiousness to get the meeting to close was that those very same words were first said by our beloved King David in Psalm 22 in our Hebrew scriptures. And what Jew would dare say that our beloved King David committed blasphemy? So I went home that evening and I said to my husband and to my daughter, I have no more doubts. Yeshua HaMashiach is the Jewish Messiah. He's my Jewish Messiah. But it was interesting that during my studies, of course, I did share what I was studying and researching with Ron and Elisa. And one time I was absolutely shocked because I had read where Moses lifted up the bronze serpent in the wilderness. And as long as the Israelites looked on the serpent that was up on a pole, which actually was a standard, which is shaped actually like a cross. It was the pole and then the beam going across, and then it would be the standard that was held on there.
Sure.
Well, they had the bronze serpent. And to me, it just didn't seem right. It sounded Christian. It didn't sound Jewish. And so Elisa came home from school. I said, Elisa, you're not going to believe what I read in the Bible. And I read it to her, and she says, you know, Mommy, we studied that in school today, and we acted it out in a play. And I felt, oh my goodness, God knows exactly what I'm doing. He provided this school play for Elisa so that she could reassure me that, yes, this is something that Jewish people need to know about.
So her entire family became believers in the Messiah, but I don't know if you caught that, because we Jewish people were murmuring again and again in the wilderness, and Moses holds up something which appears almost like a cross, has a serpent on it. He says, if you will look at this as a substitute, you will be healed. And when Yeshua hung on the tree, every sin that you committed and that I committed and that Sharon committed and her daughter and her husband committed was on that tree. And according to Isaiah 53, written 800 years before Jesus came, by his stripes, by Mashiach's stripes, we were healed. And as the Israelites looked at that serpent representing sin on that tree that looked like a cross, they were healed. And as you ask the God of, just like Sharon did, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, show me the truth about Yeshua, he'll work in a way that you need. Because just as Sharon had the thought, I'm going to study the scriptures, I'm going to think for myself, you're watching this television show because God wants you to think for yourself. It's too important to have intimacy with God, to walk with God, to talk with God, to have no fear of death, no fear of life. It's the most wonderful. There is not a close second. Listen, it's the Megillah. It's the truth. Trust me.